There's always a couple rules about going first in a presentation like this. First is you're the warm-up act, so no one expects you to be any good. Second, you always start with a catchy title that wakes people up. So, are you doing it wrong? Yeah, there's nothing positive in that. As my co-presenters have issued the challenge of how do we turn that into to a positive experience for everyone. Show of hands real quick. I'm going to have some audience participation. How many of you have a well-defined program focused on high potential development within your organization? Anyone? All right, so it's not are you doing it wrong, it's how to do it. So, can we make that quick edit to the first slide? Okay, let me ask a different question. How many of you might actually have a formal succession planning process? As in, if one of your leaders was a donkey lost in the pasture, that fell into a well, that you could replace that donkey tomorrow with a well-defined talent management and or succession planning program. Show of hands, succession planning. Yeah, a few more of you. So what I want to talk about today is simply this, and that is what in our experience, through our research, and from a theoretical perspective, are the things that you should be concerned about when you think about developing or using the word high potential within your organization. So to keep on this positive theme that we've got going here, and a positive title, we'll go to the first slide here. I'll just have you take a look at it. Yeah, it's about failed hiring practices. What's the challenge organizations face? Well, what you see in an interview isn't always what you get once you hire them, correct? It's kind of like the dating game. What you see while you're dating is not necessarily what you get once you get married. Unfortunately, there's second regrets. What's interesting is there's a recent study out by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the United States. And what the CDC found is that 66% of workplace illness or of illness in general is caused by stress, specifically by workplace stress. So what that means to us, and we take a little liberty in interpreting their data, is poor leadership is what drives stress in an organization and stress within your workforce, right? So what that means is leadership is a public health crisis. Leadership is what is causing individuals to be successful or potentially to fail in an organization. So shouldn't we be concerned about it? The challenge is when we think about traditional high potential development programs or HIPOs in general, bringing in outside leaders. A Center for Creative Leadership, CCL, had a study. It's a little bit dated 2009, but the data still hold true. And that is 66% of leaders hired from outside the organization to come in and fill a role internally don't work out. We talked yesterday with a group of CEOs and we asked the question, why? What was their opinion of why people didn't work out? We got things from they come in and just try to implement what they've done before. They're a bulldozer. They don't fit from a culture perspective. They don't fit from a job perspective. Whatever it may be, the challenge is organizations are finding it more effective to grow talent internally than externally. The challenge is even internally, inside the organization, have about a 48% failure rate in terms of being successful on the job or successful as a leader. I'm going to use the word leadership a lot, and so I think it's important that as we think about leadership that we actually have a working definition of it. This is because in Hogan's view, the academic study of leadership has failed. So you look across 50 years of academic research on leadership, you don't find anything. What you find are either just interesting correlates, like leaders with bigger feet tend to perform better. I mean, just stuff that is trivial and nonsensical. Or you find the study of business gurus. So if you go to the airport, you look in the book section in the airport, what you find are the tips and tricks of self-appointed leadership gurus. Again, there's no data, there's no science behind it. So let's do this. Let's take a working definition of what is leadership. And I'm going to show you two different views. The first view is the traditional HR view. The traditional HR view is defined by position. So if you think the military, you think about the police force, because I have stripes on my sleeve or stars on my collar, I must be a leader, right? Well, not exactly, but that's how we typically define it. Leadership is defined by position. The second thing about leadership is oftentimes it's evaluated by what? Our boss's perspective of how we're doing. It's basically, it's a popularity contest. How well do I stay out of trouble? How well do I keep my boss informed? How well do I protect what my boss or what the leader is trying to accomplish? And then third, what's it focused on? Competencies. Competencies that oftentimes an organization is created for shareholders or for the public, for investors. What are the competencies that we care about? It's those things that are inside the front door of the office building that people look at and kind of smile and say, man, this would be a great environment if we actually cared about what's on the wall. So there was a U.S. president by the name of Eisenhower who took the position of not only a general but then also as a president. They asked him after he left the White House, they said, President Eisenhower, what's different now that you're not president of the United States? And he says, well, no one laughs at my jokes anymore. So again, leadership defined by position, not necessarily the right way to do it. What we think is that you ought to take more of an evolutionary perspective on leadership. And that is, we all developed as hunter-gatherer societies, right? So go back 2 million years. We all lived in groups, and we all competed for, in essence, similar resources. So what defined leadership then that actually helped not only the organization of the local tribe, but the tribe survive in general? Well, what you found is that people were brought together by a common purpose, and that was survival. So you had Tribe A over in the valley, you had Tribe B down by the river, and guess what? Eventually, Tribe A really liked the fact that they could go down to the river. And so here they come, and Tribe B says, oh my gosh, they're coming, and they're not coming to negotiate. This is not going to be a merger. This is not going to be an acquisition. This is going to be a massacre. Because back in the tribal societies, guess what? They didn't come to negotiate. They came to invade. When they invade, they killed you, and they eliminated you from the gene pool. So leadership became a big deal. And leadership was finding someone in the group that could set aside everyone else's self-interest and work towards a common goal. And that common goal was providing not only security and safety, but food as well as stability across the tribe. So for us, we think about leadership as simply this: the ability to build and maintain a high-performing team. For us, that is the clear definition of leadership. If we're going to define it that way, then how do we evaluate it? It's based on the team performance. How does your team perform in relationship to the competition or to others? And then finally, where should the focus be? On the qualities that are valued by the team. Over the course of time, a leader starts to emerge, much like the one that went to jail today, I'm sure. Looked good on the surface, had a lot of great qualities up front. But through discretion and other characteristics that my colleague Jared's going to talk about this afternoon around toxic leadership, started to derail. And over the course of time, what happens is the team says, that's enough. There are some consequences if we define leadership this way. First of all, it helps us clarify the meaning and purpose of leadership. What is leadership about? It's not about the individual, it's about the team. Second, it helps us define what bad leadership is. Again, there's not a real good consensus on what good leadership is. So let's take the contrarian view. And then third, it allows us to put together a pretty simple measure of performance. And that is, how is your team doing? How is the leader doing from a performance perspective? So if we define leadership that way, then what are followers looking for? So if leadership is the ability to build an effective team that has, a good performance, a good leader, then what are followers looking for? We really think there's 4 key things. The first is followers are looking for a leader that has integrity, that does what I call keeps it between the lines. That is, doesn't play favorites, is an individual that has morals and ethics and shows those on a regular basis, and doesn't waver even when the stress and pressure is high. Second, someone that actually has judgment, that will make a decision. At Hogan, we talk about post-decision bias and pre-decision bias. So from a judgment perspective, not only will you make a decision, but then do you evaluate almost immediately how good was that decision? And what we find is good leaders are actually willing to admit they made a mistake. and change direction. Leaders that are overly arrogant, that are ones who will point the finger and, as we say, sell out their team. It was my team's fault, they didn't execute correctly. Those are leaders that not only lack the judgment, but then also lack that first characteristic in terms of integrity. Third, they've got to be good at something. Did I say they have to be great strategists? No. Great executioners? No. But they have to be competent in something. That way other people will find them valuable and will be willing to follow them. Back to our hunter-gatherers. What were the leaders typically the best at? Well, one, they had consistent morals. Second, they had good judgment, as in which way did the deer go. And third, they typically had superior hunting ability. And so they were moved into that leadership role not only because of their integrity and judgment, but also because of their competence. And then the fourth thing that we're typically looking for in good leaders, or what we hear from others, is this vision thing. George Bush Sr., not Sonny Boy, but the older George Bush. So, he came into office on Reagan's coattails, was actually, by all measures and by all historical accounts, an effective president. What was his problem? Well, his staff came to him towards the end of his first term and said, Mr. President, what's your vision for your next term? We need to build a campaign around your vision. You're going to have to compete against this hillbilly from Arkansas by the name of Bill Clinton. And George Bush is reported sitting there and saying, vision, what's this vision thing? Vision matters. Being able to explain to someone where you're going, why you're going that direction, clarifying roles and goals is what we're looking for from good leaders. So again, our model is integrity, judgment, competence, and vision. I would add two more that actually came out of the good to great work that Collins did. And that is, other people are also looking for leaders that are amazingly persistent, as in they don't give up the first time they fall down. And the second is, they're actually quite humble, which blows out of the water this whole notion of charismatic leadership. I told you I was going to focus a little bit on the negative. That's because I'm the warm-up act and everyone else is going to be wonderful and positive. What's bad leadership look like? This was a survey of about 15,000 individuals that we did, all working adults. Ask them a simple question. What personality-based characteristics define poor leadership? And it's pretty interesting. 52% said, my worst boss is an arrogant boss. Someone who's unwilling to share credit, someone who's unwilling to play as part of the team, where they make it all about themselves. 50% said, my worst boss is someone who's manipulative, as in plays the game, is willing to do things outside the box that are questionable, and is not necessarily protecting the team along the way. And you can see the others here. Emotionally volatile. I don't know what I'm walking into. When you walk in the office and it's, well, am I getting the good one or the bad one? Why don't I wait a while and find out? Let someone else go into the director's office and see if they come out unscathed before I walk in with my question or problem. The point being is, Bob Hogan says, and this is a line he uses all the time, bad leadership is simply the inability to build a team. And it's drawn from, and it's a part of these various characteristics. With that said, I'm going to focus a little bit more on high potentials, but let me tell you why it matters. Again, from a stat that we pulled out of a survey done by not only McKinsey, but also by Gallup, looking at age and workforce. What's happening to the talent pool? And I realize the talent pool in Romania is actually quite young in terms of people coming into the workforce, people that are taking roles at a much younger age than the rest of the world. But let me show you what's happening on a global scale. So the percent decline in workers from ages 35 to 44, you could say that Germany has a talent crisis coming. So they've had a 27% decline in individuals in the workforce that are typically defined in that upper talent pool. So people that have been in the workforce for 15 years, 14 years, just depends on where they are in terms of age. Followed by the US and the UK. Italy, Japan, and China are lagging behind slightly in terms of those individuals that organizations are saying are ready to come in and to assume leadership roles. So where does that take us? That takes us to actually identifying and trying to find some high potentials. And that's really the purpose of today. And what I want you to walk away with is our perspective on 5 things you can do to build a better talent pool, to build a better high potential program. With that said, what are some of the current practices? What are the things that we're seeing? What we're seeing is that only 44% of organizations in the U.S. surveyed by the Corporate Executive Board say that they actually have an active high potential program. So only 44% of the organizations. Out of that, senior leaders say only 18% of those senior leaders across those 1,000 organizations say they actually have bench strength that could move into roles today and continue performing at an acceptable level. So even within the U.S., we know a lot about talent management. No, we don't know much of anything. We talk a lot about it, but in terms of organizations that are doing it right and organizations that feel prepared, there is a shortage. What's driving this problem? Well, there's some common things around what people are doing, and this is what I call and why they're wrong. The first and foremost is it's a focus on what people have done in the past and who they know. We call it the good old boy network. It's my father's father's father was your father's friend, so shouldn't I be able to move into this director role, right? It's called Ivy Gat incompetencies. So we've got the problem of just traditional networks of who you know, what you've done for them, and thus why they'll evaluate you as a top performer. Second, there's a lack of objectivity in a lot of programs. Again, it's based on they did 2 good projects, so they must be a high potential. Let's put them into a program, let's spend several $100,000 across the course of, say, 24 months on developing them, on coaching them, and then let's figure out where we put them next. Versus actually stepping back and asking, does this person have the potential to perform at the next level? Versus, are they just really great where they are now? Third, once you're in, you're in. And what I mean by that is simply, once you're into a talent development program, once you're identified as a high potential, most organizations don't have any accountability around how do we keep them in. So it may be that through the development programs they see this person's not a great fit, but what do we do to remove them? How do we pull them out? Or much like we talk about the U.S. government, once you're a government employee, you're a government employee for life. That shouldn't be the same attitude when we come to dealing with our high potentials. Fourth, there's that lack of focus and accountability around development. We do a lot of work with multinationals, the best ones. There's accountability around your development plan. It's not simply submitted, but it's actually evaluated, scored, graded, and we look at the consequences. And then finally, not accounting for the changing nature of work. So those are some of the common practices of what we see as wrong. Let's get to the meat of this. What are 5 things we can do to make things better? Our 5 key talking points are that when organizations want to ensure a competitive advantage, they're identifying engaging high potentials that are willing to actually work. They're actually willing to improve themselves. They'll take the strategic self-awareness that they gather from the program, they'll create a strategic development plan, and then they'll actually execute that. So our 5 points are simply this: defining potential, identifying those high potentials, using objective measures to do so. Why? We use objective measures to do so that we can start developing our high potentials. And then finally, we've got to pay attention to engagement. So let me walk through each of those just real briefly. First, when we talk about defining potential, it's the 80-20 rule. Is everybody familiar with the 80-20 rule? And that is 20% of your workforce accounts for 80% of the performance. If you're in a sales organization, 20% of your customers probably account for about 80% of your revenue. So it's an interesting number that plays out in a lot of different ways across society. So what we know is that 20% of your high potentials account for 80% of the performance, and your high potentials typically are your higher performers. Is that always the case? No, there's some nuances that go into that that we'll talk about later on. 3 things about defining potential. High potential should be rewarding to deal with, as in people actually interact with them. You can't have a high potential that sits in their office and acts like a closed phone booth. People have to be willing to interact and find the individual rewarding. Second, they are talented and learn quickly. So they're able to pick up multiple tasks that may or may not be as part of their core competencies that they came out of, say, the university with. And then the third thing is they're willing to take initiative. They do things without being begged or told or directed. So they're going to step up to the plate, they're going to take initiative, and they actually seem leader-like. They also take responsibility for their mistakes. They also establish a vision. They also have some judgment. It sounds like those four things people are looking for in a leader, doesn't it? The second thing about doing it right is how you're identifying your high potentials. There's a great article by a guy named Alan Church. He runs all the talent development programs at PepsiCo worldwide. And Alan talks about how do you identify potential and what happens to those that aren't earmarked as a high potential. And his bottom line was, you can get past organizationally those that are in the club versus not in the club. What you can't get away with is nominating and having people in your high potential pool that others look at and laugh. How did you get into that? You know, your team's been doing all the work for the last 5 years. How did you pull that off? And so as you think about your high potential programs, think about the talent pool that you're pulling them from and how they're identified. Organizations tend to overestimate someone's performance. Again, why? Well, 30% of the current high performers are actually high potentials. 90% of those, if you look at the research across organizations, struggle at the next level. So even though we have some measures of performance, we don't always get it right. Second, performance measures are typically subjective. Again, it's back to how much have you ingratiated with your boss, how much have you kept your boss out of trouble, how have you done at supporting his or her vision versus what's your actual performance been. We have a couple of clients in the sales organization space or in the sales space where their objective measures of performance, so account retention, account increase, loss of turnover, productivity, for certain individuals is actually quite high. So they're top performing people from an objective standpoint. Subjectively, though, those are the people that are rated as the lowest performers by their boss. Why? And how can you have that conflict between the data? Customers love them, their boss hates them. So again, simply using a supervisor recommendation, which is generally what happens, can lead to problems. And then finally, traditional measures reward behavior that is often counterproductive. So that bold, aggressive salesperson that you love having out on the street that's driving revenue, put them into a sales leadership perspective, and into a sales leadership position. Does that same bold, arrogant, aggressive style work when they're supposed to develop and mentor others? Probably not. So again, what got them there may not keep them there. Third point, use objective measures. At Hogan, we're known from a personality perspective. So looking at the difference between identity and reputation. So the you that you know versus the you that we know. I hate to tell you, but the you that you know is really not important. It's the you that we know, or your reputation, that we make decisions on for promotions, for employment, for development. And it's your reputation that we want to measure through objective measures in terms of evaluating you as a high potential. We're looking at your bright side, your everyday characteristics, your dark side, the challenges that you may bring to the table that when under stress and pressure start to emerge, and then also your values and drivers. So the type of culture that you'll create, the things that you'll reward. So when we think about objective measures, we ought to be evaluating your work habits, your leadership potential, your potential or probable derailers, as well as the job fit or ideal job fit for you from a high potential perspective. As we're doing that, I think it's really important to pay attention to this concept of engagement. So our fourth point is pay attention to engagement. Real quickly, what is engagement not? Well, individual characteristics or an individual characteristic is not engagement. Engagement doesn't happen at the individual level. Engagement's not job satisfaction. I know a lot of people that are in an organization that really hate their job, but guess what? They continue to come to work and actually do things. Why? It results in a paycheck. Third, engagement's not job involvement. Just think about, I enjoy the task, but again, I don't like the organization. So I really associate with being an electrician, but you know what? I really hate the fact that I have to interact with people because my organization makes me talk to customers. So again, engagement's not about job involvement. And then engagement's also not about organizational commitment. Organizational commitment, just look at the professional soldiers that we've had deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. You really think they like their job? But they're committed to the organization. So there's a difference there between engagement and these other variables. So what is engagement? Well, for us, engagement is being energized, being proud, being enthusiastic, having positive attitudes towards work. It's finding high levels of persistence. That's a good definition of engagement. It's being positive with your positive affect and involvement. It's being enthusiastic and taking pride in the work that you do. And it's finding meaning in the work that you do. Why do we stress engagement? Well, your high potentials and your leaders directly impact engagement in the organization. And that is through integrity, competence, judgment, and vision. It's the environment that they create within the workforce. It's the morale. It's the decision-making styles that they have. It's the values and drivers. That directly influences subordinates or the workers' attitudes towards not only the organization but the world of work. That drives engagement, and engagement directly impacts the bottom line or job performance. In the U.S., $300 billion alone they estimate is lost in people not being engaged in their job every year. So it is a big deal. The last piece, as we start to wrap up here and get us back on the time schedule, developing high potentials is the last piece. It's really important, we think, to identify high potentials' key strengths, not only to put them into a development program, but why just use that as a one-event activity with this objective data? Let's help them build a strategic development plan. Let's discuss the stumbling blocks that they may face. Let's actually work with them to develop a skill set they may not have, such as being able to coach and mentor others. We talk about their technical competence of, can they use a balance sheet? Do they understand cost accounting? That's great. Those are things that we hope they got from the educational system. But when we start talking about how to engage and drive performance as a leader of a team, oftentimes people need some assistance in doing so. The other thing we want to do is help them focus on these unconscious biases. So what's the culture they're going to create? What are the rewards and sanctions that they're going to hand out? And how that drives, again, strategic self-awareness. So we think if you're identifying them correctly, defining high potentials correctly, identifying them using objective measures, keeping the people engaged, and then focusing on development, those are the right things that you should see in a high potential program. So, since we talk about personality and who you are determines how you lead, I just want to show you 3 quick examples of what we see in terms of successful high potentials, or can you differentiate high potentials in your talent pool. Most of you may not be familiar with our scales. That really doesn't matter. Just take away from this that the blue line and the red line, there's differences across things like social skills and drive, which is that ambition, sociability, interpersonal sensitivity. What we see is those individuals that are successful, they have that strong potential, actually look different on objective measures of characteristics. That is, you can successfully differentiate potential from non-potential. Secondly, what you also know is that different characteristics predict different things, just like in a selection process. So think of your high potential process just like you do hiring individuals from the outside. We're making a decision of who we're putting into a talent program, which is in essence a new job. Again, what we see in this sample, this is from a convenience store, so from a retail sales. What we find is individuals that are more adaptive to the stress and pressure, handle the bumps in the road a little bit better with adjustment. Individuals that are more driven and competitive, want to get ahead, want to be in those leadership roles, which we call ambition, and are willing to learn new things to keep up, to continue to drive their own education and performance, which is what we call learning approach, perform at a higher rate. The last thing that I'd say in terms of an example, looking at VP promotion or VP high potentials, the top graph, the people that were chosen for a VP development program within a retail organization, what we see is that people that were promoted had higher scores on things such as being arrogant, testing the limits, being a little bit more self-promoting, which is what we call colorful. Those individuals were the ones who were actually selected to be in a high potential program. But what happened? What happened 1 year later at the end of the program, which is the bottom graph? Those same individuals that were higher on bold, higher on mischievous, higher on colorful and imaginative actually derailed, actually were asked to leave the organization. The point of this slide is simply what we get attracted to in an interview process in our traditional people meetings is the same thing that over the course of time can cause people to fail or derail. So once again, using objective measures besides just an interview and past performance is so critical. As I wrap up, a couple of things, and there's always more, and we're happy to talk afterwards. Focus internally. Remember Thucydides from the Peloponnesian War. I care less about our enemy's strategy than our own mistakes. Focus internally about what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. Second, use objective measures. Use objective measures because they're going to give you better prediction. Third, you have to have accountability in your high potential programs. Once you identify someone as a hypo, that's not their ticket. That's not the end of the road. They actually have to perform and they have to show that they're willing and able to move into that next level of leadership. And then finally, you've got to drive strategic self-awareness. It's making people aware of their strengths, their challenges, their values, and the culture that they'll create, because that has a direct impact on the engagement of the organization, and the engagement of the organization is driving bottom line business results. I hope that wasn't too depressing. The good news is, once again, I was simply the warm-up act, and now I'm going to turn it over to someone who is much more talented than I am. Thank you.